Rain had been falling over Seattle for 3 days without pause. The gray sky hung low over Puget Sound, pressing against the glass walls of the Hale residence like a tired ghost. Inside, silence ruled. The sound of rain became the only rhythm that still existed in the mansion. Gabriel Hale sat by the window, his reflection merging with the world outside. The wheels of his chair barely made a sound as he shifted slightly, adjusting his position with practiced restraint. It had been 5 years since he last stood upright, 5 years since the car crash that took his wife, and left him trapped between life and something less than living. He used to be the kind of man who filled rooms with his voice, who built companies from scratch, and gave speeches that inspired people to believe in impossible things. Now the only thing that believed in him was the rain. It came every day, as loyal as grief. The housekeeper moved quietly around him, her shoes soft against the polished floors. She had worked for him since before the accident, and she knew the language of silence better than anyone. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Hale, the agency, sent someone new for the cleaning shift. The usual staff is out sick. He did not look away from the window. Make sure she understands not to disturb the upstairs wing. Yes, sir, she replied. He heard the sound of footsteps fading toward the foyer, then the faint creak of the front door opening. The wind carried in the scent of rain and something else, something alive. Gabriel reached for his tablet, pretending to read an email that did not matter. He had long since mastered the art of avoiding connection. People meant noise, and noise meant memory. Yet when he glanced toward the reflection in the glass, he saw movement near the gate. A girl in a thin yellow raincoat, her umbrella turned inside out by the wind. She bent down, gathering the remains of her umbrella, like a wounded bird, her hair plastered to her face. A stray cat meowed beside her, trembling in the rain. She looked around, hesitated, then took off her coat and wrapped the cat in it. Gabriel felt something inside his chest tighten a pressure that was not pain, but the echo of it. He told himself it was nothing. He turned his chair, slightly angling away from the window. But his eyes betrayed him and found her again. She stood on the porch, dripping wet, waiting for the door to open. When the housekeeper finally let her in, Gabriel could hear their muffled voices echoing faintly across the marble hall. "You must be from Emerald Cleaning," the housekeeper said. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Isla," they said to report here at 10. Her voice carried a warmth that did not belong to gray mornings. Gabriel closed his eyes, annoyed at his curiosity. He had stopped reacting to beauty years ago. Beauty belonged to a world that had forgotten him. Still, when he opened his eyes again, he saw her reflection in the glass. As she stepped into the hall, small frame damp curls. The awkward grace of someone who did not yet know how much the world could hurt her. The old ache returned, the one that reminded him he was still made of flesh, and not just the metal and glass that surrounded him. He wheeled himself toward his office, needing distance. The housekeeper appeared a few minutes later, holding a towel. "Would you like some tea, sir?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just keep things quiet." "She seems polite," the woman ventured. "Young but polite." "Polite doesn't matter," Gabriel murmured. "People always start polite." He meant to sound cold, but his voice came out softer, as if the rain had washed away his armor. The housekeeper nodded and left. The silence returned, but it was not the same. It felt interrupted, unsettled, like the air before lightning. Hours passed. Gabriel tried to focus on his work, the endless line of proposals and reports, that no longer excited him. He found himself pausing, listening. Downstairs, the faint sound of humming floated up the staircase. The girl was cleaning, and she was humming a tune. He could not place something simple, tender, alive. He wheeled himself toward the landing, stopping at the top of the staircase. Through the glass railing, he saw her wiping the large windows overlooking the sound. The storm outside had darkened the sky, but the light in the room seemed to come from her movement. She was not graceful in the traditional sense. She moved with small errors, bumping into the bucket, missing a spot, then laughing at herself. That laughter hit him harder than he expected. It had been 5 years since anyone laughed in this house. He watched her until the guilt of watching made him pull back. His hands gripped the wheels tightly, leaving marks on the rubber. He turned away, breathing slow and controlled. He had not felt desire in years, and he told himself this was not it. It was empathy, maybe curiosity, nothing more. But when the lightning flashed across the bay, illuminating her silhouette through the window pane, he realized how long it had been since he had looked at someone and felt something move inside him. The next morning, the housekeeper asked if he had slept. He lied and said yes. In truth, he had spent most of the night listening to the rain and imagining the sound of her voice again. He hated that he wanted to. He had promised himself never to feel that hunger again, the hunger that had died with his wife. But life, he was learning, had strange ways of returning. It did not knock politely. It slipped in through the cracks, through rain and glass, and the sound of a girl humming while she worked. That afternoon, the agency called to confirm the schedule. The housekeeper asked if she should keep the new girl for another shift. Gabriel stared at the rain-smeared window before answering. Yes, he said finally, let her come again tomorrow. The words left his mouth before his mind caught up. When the call ended, he looked down at his hands, wondering what exactly he had just allowed back into his life. Outside, the rain continued steady and endless, but for the first time in years, he did not mind the sound. The next morning, the rain softened into a mist that floated like breath over the sound. From the upper floor, Gabriel watched the sky bleed pale gray light through the glass walls. The world outside looked washed and fragile, as if it might dissolve with one more sigh from heaven. He had promised himself not to wait for her, but when the distant buzz of the gate sounded, something inside him straightened. The housekeeper opened the door, and the girl from yesterday stepped in again. Hair still damp, cheeks pink from the cold, her raincoat patched with tape. "Good morning, sir," she said softly when their eyes met across the hall. He gave a small nod, barely moving, the kind of acknowledgement that said both go ahead and don't look too long. She smiled anyway, the kind of smile that didn't need permission. Ela Moreno, she introduced herself to the housekeeper again. "I'm supposed to be here from 9 to 4. I'll try not to make noise." "Noise is fine," the housekeeper said, surprising even herself. "It's silence that weighs too much in this house." Ila's laughter was light, quick, and it traveled through the hallways like sunlight sneaking past curtains. Gabriel wheeled himself back into his study, pretending to read the news. The sound of her footsteps echoed faintly, mixed with the occasional clink of glass and the rustle of cloth. It wasn't intrusive, it was human. He realized how long it had been since human sounds had filled this space without pity or tension. After an hour, curiosity overpowered pride. He moved silently toward the landing again. Below him, Isla balanced on a small step stool, cleaning the massive windows that looked out toward the gray sea. Every few minutes, she'd stop, lean closer to check her work, then wipe again with the determination of someone trying to erase her own reflection. Her ponytail kept slipping loose, and she'd fix it with the back of her wrist, leaving streaks of water on her forehead. She hummed while she worked a melody too simple to belong to the radio. It sounded like something remembered from childhood, maybe a lullaby her mother once sang. Before the world grew sharp, the more he watched, the harder it became to pretend he wasn't. Her presence filled the air with something unmeasured, a warmth that didn't ask permission to exist. When she turned suddenly, their eyes met through the reflection on the glass. Her hand froze midair, the cloth pressed against the window. For a heartbeat, they both stayed still, caught between mirror and reality. Then she smiled, not out of flirtation or apology, but the way people smile at strangers when they're trying to say, "I mean no harm." He nodded once and rolled away before she could read anything in his face. He returned to his office, closed the door, and exhaled slowly. It wasn't the kind of attraction that belonged to flesh yet. It was recognition, the unsettling sense that the world had placed a reminder in front of him, something fragile enough to break the numbness he had built. Around noon, the smell of coffee drifted through the house. He followed it unconsciously. Isla was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup while the housekeeper prepared lunch. "Would you like some, Mr. Hale?" she asked when she saw him in the doorway. "I can make it the way you prefer, black, no sugar." The familiarity startled him. "How would you know that?" "You have 2 coffee mugs, both stained, the same way," she said simply. "One sits near the sink, one on your desk. It's a guess." He almost smiled but didn't. "You're observant. It's part of the job," she said, and then after a pause, "and part of surviving." He studied her, noticing how young she looked up close. The small scar above her eyebrow, the way her nails were short and uneven. Not delicate, real. "How long have you been cleaning houses?" "Since last year," she replied, taking a sip of coffee she probably couldn't afford to spill. "I'm paying for my sister's college, art school in Portland. She's the one with the gift. I'm just the hands that help." He looked at those hands, red from detergent, trembling slightly. "Hands matter," he said before he could stop himself. "The world is built by them." She looked up, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but some hands only get noticed when they're dirty." He turned away, unable to hold her gaze any longer. "You should finish the windows upstairs," he said. "The light's better in the afternoon." She nodded, understanding the dismissal, and left the kitchen without another word. Yet as she walked past him, he caught the faint scent of jasmine, the kind his wife used to wear. For a second, memory and present collided. His chest ached in a place therapy never reached. He told himself it was coincidence, nothing more. The afternoon blurred into the soft rhythm of rain and movement. Isla worked upstairs now, and the faint sound of her humming drifted through the vents like wind carrying warmth into cold rooms. At some point, Gabriel's concentration broke. He left his desk and followed the music. In the gallery room, once his wife's art studio, Isla stood near a shelf of framed photographs. She was dusting them carefully one by one until her fingers brushed against a silver frame. It fell with a small clatter. The sound was enough to bring him to the doorway. She bent quickly to pick it up, eyes wide with apology. "I'm so sorry, She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the picture. A woman with dark hair laughing beside Gabriel at a piano. The image glowed faintly under the gray light. Isla hesitated, her throat tightening. She looked happy, she whispered. You must have loved her so much. The sentence hung in the air, uninvited, yet impossibly sincere. Gabriel's mouth went dry. He could have told her to leave, could have shut the door, could have reminded her that his life was not hers to read, but something in her tone disarmed him completely. It wasn't pity, it was recognition, the kind that came from someone who had lost too. He said nothing. His eyes fell to the picture, then to the floor. Isla placed the frame back carefully and stepped away, her voice barely audible. I'll be more careful, she said, and left the room. Gabriel stayed there long after she was gone, the echo of her words circling his mind like smoke. That night he couldn't sleep. The rain tapped softly against the window pane, and every drop seemed to whisper the same line back to him. You must have loved her so much. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the sound of his wife's laughter. Instead, he heard a young woman humming in another room, alive, imperfect, uninvited. And for the first time in years, he didn't want the house to be silent. The next day began the way most days did for Gabriel Hale, with the slow creak of the chair's wheels and the low hum of rain beyond the glass. But the silence that used to fill his mornings had changed. It felt expectant now, as though the house itself was waiting for her. When Isla arrived, the scent of wet air followed her in. She smiled shyly at the housekeeper and went straight to her duties, her movements quiet but never fearful. Gabriel tried to pretend he was busy, eyes fixed on the glow of his tablet. Yet every sound she made drew him closer to awareness, the faint clink of her bucket, the rustle of cloth, the small gasp whenever she reached too high for a window pane. The camera feed on his desk flickered. Through it he could see her reflection, moving across the rooms like a flicker of sunlight. He told himself he was only checking the security system, but as the minutes stretched, he realized he had memorized the rhythm of her steps. By mid-morning, she had reached the east hallway, the one lined with floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the sea. The rain had paused, leaving droplets suspended on the glass, like pearls trembling each time wind brushed the bay. Gabriel watched her lift the cleaning rag, tracing slow circles against the glass, her hand small against the vast world outside. When she stepped back, her reflection merged with his own image on the other side. Two lonely figures divided by glass and circumstance. She didn't see him at first. She moved along the window, humming that same soft tune. Then, for a moment, she noticed the faint outline of his wheelchair's reflection behind her. She turned her head slightly, eyes searching, but he had already backed away into shadow. He didn't want her to know he was watching. It wasn't desire that held him there. It was fascination, the strange comfort of seeing someone who seemed unbroken by the same silence that consumed him. When he closed his eyes, he could still hear her humming the melody, rising and falling like breath. It reached him through walls, through air vents, through years of self-imposed isolation. By noon, the house felt alive again. The housekeeper found him at the doorway of the music room and hesitated. "She's playing," she said softly, as if afraid to break the spell. "Playing," Gabriel echoed. The old piano had sat untouched since the funeral. He followed the faint sound through the hallway until he saw Isla seated at the instrument, her hands tentative on the yellowed keys. She wasn't skilled, notes stumbled, rhythms faltered, but there was sincerity in every mistake. Her face carried the quiet concentration of someone creating beauty from imperfection. Gabriel stopped in the doorway, watching the dust rise from each keystroke, like ghosts fleeing captivity. The sound was uneven but human, and it filled the house like light spilling through cracks. When she realized he was there, she froze mid-note. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, half rising. "The piano was dusty, and I thought, keep playing," he interrupted before he could stop himself. She hesitated, then sat back down, eyes on the keys. The melody resumed, fragile but steady. He wheeled closer, stopping a few feet behind her. From here he could see the movement of her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled when she reached for the higher notes. He hadn't realized how deeply he missed the sound of touch, the friction of skin against ivory the human will pressed into sound. When she finished, she exhaled, smiling nervously. "I used to play a little in high school," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Nothing like this, though. This piano feels like it remembers things." Gabriel's throat tightened. "It does," he said quietly. She looked up at him then, and for a second the weight of 5 years collapsed between them. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full. "Thank you for letting me," she said softly. "Music doesn't belong to anyone," he replied. But when she left the room, he touched the edge of the piano lid, as though it belonged entirely to her now. That evening, after she had gone, he sat alone in the dim light, replaying the moment in his mind. He opened the house's security app and accessed the audio feed from the living room camera. There, hidden among the static, was the faint echo of her tune. He listened again and again until it became less of a song and more of a pulse. The following day, he found her arranging flowers in the hallway. She had brought them herself, wild daisies, pale lilies, a sprig of lavender tied with string. "These aren't from the store," she admitted when he asked. "They grow behind my building. Not much sun there, but they try anyway." He studied the flowers, then her face. "Why bring them here? Because the glass feels lonely," she said simply. "It needs something that breathes." He wanted to tell her the house wasn't lonely, the man inside it was, but the words caught behind his teeth. Instead, he said, "They're beautiful." "Not really," she smiled. "Just stubborn." Her words followed him for hours. That night, he dreamed of rain on glass of hands that refused to stop reaching even when the sky refused to clear. When he woke, the sound of the sea reminded him of her piano melody, how the waves and her notes shared the same uncertain rhythm. Over the next few weeks, a quiet pattern took shape. She would arrive in the morning hum while she worked and leave in the late afternoon, her shoes squeaking softly against marble. Gabriel would find excuses to linger near wherever she was assigned, the kitchen, the gallery, the staircase, pretending to check his tablet or supervise repairs. Sometimes she'd catch him watching, and instead of looking away, she'd smile as if forgiving him for being human. He began noticing the small things, how she always tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear before speaking, how she hummed louder when nervous, how she stood still to admire the light refracting through glass after cleaning it. There were moments when the air between them grew charged, moments he could almost feel her presence, even before she entered a room. One afternoon, the housekeeper found Isla standing before the large mirror in the hall, her reflection framed by sunlight. She was studying her own face with an expression Gabrielle recognized, a mix of wonder and disbelief, as if she couldn't quite see what others saw. He didn't mean to interrupt, but his voice carried. "You look different when you smile," he said from behind her. She turned, startled, then laughed softly. "Is that good or bad? It's alive," he said. The words escaped before he could hide them. She looked at him for a long moment, the laughter fading into something more fragile. "You look different too," she whispered, "less like glass." He didn't answer. She left soon after leaving him alone with his reflection. For the first time, he didn't hate what he saw. The following morning, the storm returned. The sky darkened, waves slammed against the cliffs, and the house trembled with the sound. Isla came anyway, soaked and smiling. "They said I could skip today," she told him, hanging her coat. "But the flowers would miss me." He wanted to tell her he would too, but all he managed was a quiet, "You shouldn't have come in this weather." "You shouldn't sit by the window all day," she countered gently. The storm raged outside, glass rattling between them, but for once, Gabriel didn't flinch at the sound. He watched her move through the light, her reflection breaking and reforming across every surface, until he realized what had been missing all these years. It wasn't movement or touch, it was witness, someone to see him, not as the man in the wheelchair or the legend behind a company, but as a human being who had once been loved and could perhaps be loved again. When she left that evening, he stayed by the window long after her car disappeared down the wet road. The house no longer felt like a cage of glass. It felt like the inside of a heartbeat. That night, the storm came without warning. The sky above Puget Sound turned black, and a live wind tearing across the cliffs, rain striking the glass walls like hands begging to be let in. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat, the house appeared suspended between sea and sky, a fragile monument to isolation. Inside, the power flickered, then died. The silence that followed was so complete, it made Gabriel's breath sound too loud. The emergency lights failed to start. The house became a dark labyrinth of glass and shadow. From the lower floor, he heard footsteps and the quick sound of a voice calling his name. "Mr. Hale, are you okay?" It was Isla. He hesitated, uncertain whether to answer, but the wind roared against the walls, and her voice came again closer, this time softer. "It's all right. I brought candles." A moment later, a golden glow appeared in the doorway. Isla stood there, her hair damp, the hem of her shirt clinging to her skin, a candle cupped in both hands. The light trembled across her face, and Gabriel realized how long it had been since he'd seen another person illuminated by fire instead of a screen. "The generator didn't start," she said, stepping into the room. "Do you have a flashlight?" "In the drawer by the desk," he said, his voice lower than usual. She set the candle down and found it, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. It wasn't even a real touch, but his body reacted as if remembering something it shouldn't. She handed him the flashlight, but he didn't turn it on. The candlelight was enough. "You should go home," he said. "The roads will flood." "Not yet," she replied, glancing at the windows. "The agency says to stay put if it's dangerous outside. I'll wait until the rain slows." He wanted to argue, to tell her that her safety mattered more than anything else, but he couldn't find the words. She began lighting more candles around the room, placing them on shelves on the piano along the window ledge. The soft glow revealed the space in a new way, all warmth and flicker, like the house itself was breathing. Gabriel watched her move from one flame to the next, her shadow trailing behind her like a second heartbeat. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she answered, smiling faintly, "but I like the way light looks when it has to fight." The sentence stayed with him. When she finished, she sat across from him, the candle between them. Outside, thunder rolled over the bay. Do you mind if I talk? She asked. Talking keeps me calm. He nodded. She told him about her sister, about the art school in Portland, about nights working double shifts to send money for rent. Her voice carried no self-pity, only endurance. Sometimes I think I'll never get out of that apartment, she said. But then I tell myself I just have to keep moving. Even if no one sees me, at least I'm not still. He studied her in the half-light. You're wrong, he said. Someone sees you. She met his gaze, and for a long moment they didn't look away. The candle hissed softly as a drop of wax hit the table. You don't talk much, she said gently. Because there's nothing left worth saying, he replied. There's always something, she said, even if it's just to remind yourself you're still here. She leaned back in the chair, the candlelight catching the curve of her jaw. I used to think desire was the enemy of peace, he said, suddenly surprising himself. It made me reckless. It made me lose her. Your wife, yes. He swallowed hard. After the accident, everything inside me shut down. Even wanting something felt like betrayal. Isla didn't move. The candle between them flickered like a heartbeat, caught between breaths. Maybe wanting isn't betrayal, she said quietly. Maybe it's how life forgives us. Outside thunder broke again, and rain pounded the glass until it sounded like applause from some invisible audience. Gabriel turned his head toward the window, the reflection of flame flickering over his face. He looked older and younger at once, like a man waking from a long sleep. You're 20, he said finally. You should be dancing somewhere, not lighting candles for a broken man. Maybe she said, but broken things make the best light. She stood and moved closer to the window. The candlelight followed her across the room, painting her reflection over the storm. He wheeled closer, without realizing it, drawn by something neither of them named. You shouldn't be near the glass, he said. It's strong, she whispered. I checked it this morning. Besides, I like watching the lightning. It reminds me how small I am. The next flash filled the room with white fire, and for an instant her silhouette glowed like a living ember. When darkness returned, she turned toward him. Her eyes caught the last of the light, warm and uncertain. You should rest, she said. You look tired. I don't sleep much. You should try. It's hard to heal when you never close your eyes. He wanted to tell her that sleep was dangerous, that dreams had teeth, but instead he said, Sit with me a minute. She hesitated only a second before nodding. She placed the candle on the low table beside him and sat on the rug legs crossed, head tilted back against the couch. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls had drawn closer just to listen. The sound of rain softened. He studied the way her hands rested on her knees, relaxed but ready. Doesn't it scare you? He asked. What being here, with me? Should it most people think so? Then I guess I'm not most people. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried truth. The candle burned lower, its light dimming until their faces were half shadow. Do you ever miss it? She asked. Touching someone, the question landed softly without judgment. He looked at his hands scarred from the metal edges of his chair. I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like, he said. But you haven't, she replied. He shook his head. No. The word barely existed. The silence stretched between them until it wasn't silence anymore, but a conversation without sound. Her eyes held his, steady and kind. Don't, he whispered. If you're kind to me now, I might remember how it feels. Maybe you need to, she said. He reached out slowly, almost involuntarily, his fingers brushing against hers. It wasn't desire alone that moved him, it was grief, longing, gratitude, all tangled into one unbearable pulse. Her hand turned slightly, her fingers closing around his, just enough to answer. No words passed between them. The thunder outside grew distant, replaced by the soft rhythm of rain. In that fragile moment, Gabriel realized he could still feel warmth, still feel the blood in his veins, and the ache that came with being alive. The candle sputtered once before dying, leaving only darkness and the faint scent of smoke. Neither of them moved. The rain filled the silence with 1,000 tiny heartbeats. When the generator finally came to life hours later and the lights returned, Isla was gone, but the candle she had left on the table still glowed faintly, a small circle of wax and fire that refused to die out. Gabriel stared at it for a long time, the ghost of her touch still echoing in his hand. He didn't know if it was love or salvation, or simply the cruel mercy of feeling again. All he knew was that something had returned, something he had buried beside the woman he lost, and now it was breathing again inside the quiet storm of his chest. Morning arrived without thunder, only the faint hush of drizzle against the glass. The world looked washed and pale, as if the storm had taken all its color with it. Gabriel sat in his chair by the window, staring at the sea, his reflection faintly overlapping the endless gray beyond. The night replayed in his mind every flicker of candlelight, every word, every breath that had filled the space between them. He could still feel the ghost of her hand against his. It wasn't lust that haunted him, it was life returning uninvited. The housekeeper knocked softly on the door. "She's gone," she said, her voice careful. "Left before sunrise. The agency sent someone else for today." He didn't answer. He looked down at his hands, remembering how hers had fit there, as if reminding him they still had purpose. "Did she say anything?" he asked finally. "Only that the storm might come back tonight," the woman said. "And that you should rest." Gabriel nodded, dismissing her gently. When she left, the silence returned heavier than before. The candle she had left behind sat on the table, its wax hardened into a thin shell. He reached for it and turned it slowly between his fingers. The faint scent of jasmine lingered. The image of her face in that light kept surfacing, no matter how hard he tried to push it away. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. He had promised himself never to cross that line between loneliness and desire. Yet here he was, chasing the memory of warmth like a starving man. He moved to his desk, opening the tablet. Dozens of unread emails waited. Contracts, investors, people wanting him to care about profit again. He ignored them all and opened a blank document instead. For years he had avoided writing anything personal, but now his hands moved almost on their own, words spilling out without thought. "You lit a candle in a house that forgot what light felt like. I didn't ask for it, but I think I needed it." He stopped, stared at the sentence, then deleted it. He wasn't ready to see himself in words yet. The doctor's appointment that afternoon forced him to leave the mansion. It had been weeks since he faced the city, and the noise felt foreign, cars' voices, movement everywhere. The physical therapist greeted him warmly. "You're stronger," she said, adjusting the braces on his legs. "If you keep at it, we'll have you walking without support in a few months." He smiled faintly. Maybe isn't enough," she replied. "What are you holding back?" He hesitated, then said fear. She raised an eyebrow. Fear of falling, fear of wanting something again, he admitted. She looked at him, understanding. "Desire is not a sin, Gabriel. It's life trying to return." The same words echoed what Isla had told him in the candlelight. Maybe wanting isn't betrayal. Maybe it's how life forgives us. He nodded slowly. When he left the clinic, the air outside smelled of wet concrete and spring. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to rush home and close the world out. He let the rain touch his face through the open car window. Back at the house, the new cleaner worked in silence. She was efficient, polite, forgettable. Gabriel found himself waiting for the sound of humming that never came. That evening, when the house grew quiet again, he wheeled to the piano room. The candles had been replaced, the floor cleaned, but the piano still held the faint smudge of her fingerprints on the edge of the keys. He pressed one note, it trembled slightly, out of tune but alive. He sat there until the rain began again. He imagined her somewhere in the city, walking home coat too thin for the cold, thinking about the same storm. He told himself it was foolish, yet when he closed his eyes, he could see her smile forming out of the darkness. The phone rang once, an investor's call, but he didn't answer. The sound broke the fragile calm and then disappeared. The world shrank again to the rhythm of rain. As night deepened, he opened his laptop to the security footage from 2 nights ago. There she was frozen in pixels, placing the last candle on the table. He watched her linger for a moment, looking at him, though she didn't know he was watching back. Then she whispered something the microphone barely caught. "Don't stop trying." The words were small, almost lost in static, but they hit like thunder. He shut the laptop and sat in the dark, the echo of her voice mixing with the rain. Something inside him shifted, less ache, more ache it was impossible to tell. He moved to the window and looked out at the horizon where the clouds met the sea. The storm had taken everything familiar, yet it had left something behind, a small quiet pulse that refused to die. He whispered to the glass, to no one, and to her at once, "You shouldn't have lit that candle." But the truth was, he didn't want it to go out. 3 weeks passed, and the rain gave way to a thin sun that seemed to mock the gray stillness inside Gabriel's house. He had not seen Isla again. The agency sent different staff every few days, each polite, professional, and forgettable. The rooms were clean, the flowers replaced, but something essential was gone. Even the sound of the sea felt quieter, as if mourning her absence. He told himself it was for the best, that whatever spark had passed between them had been nothing more than weakness meeting kindness. But each night he found himself replaying the memory of her voice, the way she said his name softly as if it carried weight. It was during one of those nights when he couldn't sleep that his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant appeared. "You should check the news before you come to the office tomorrow." He didn't go to the office the next day, but he opened the article. The headline read in bold letters, "Billionaire Gabriel Hale spotted in late-night encounter with Maid half his age." His stomach tightened as he scrolled. The picture was grainy but unmistakable. Isla leaving his gate under the rain soaked through a shadow of his figure behind the glass door. The article speculated about a secret affair and power imbalance. It dissected his reputation like vultures picking bones. He stared at the photo until the screen blurred. The comments section was worse. Typical rich man abusing privilege. "She's probably a gold digger. That poor girl hopes she sues him." He shut the phone and sat in silence, the blood in his veins turning cold. By evening, his PR manager called. "We need a statement," she said. "Deny everything. Say she was a staff member, dismissed after breaching confidentiality. And if I don't, you'll lose contracts, Gabriel. Investors are nervous. They want distance from scandal. He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. She doesn't deserve to be dragged into this. Neither do you, the woman replied. But the media doesn't care about fairness. They care about headlines. He didn't respond. After the call, he opened his laptop and searched Isla's name. The internet had already found her social media, her part-time jobs, her college record. People had posted screenshots of her face with captions calling her everything from homewrecker to liar. A small photo of her in a cafe uniform circulated with mocking comments. His hands shook as he read them. Somewhere in the city, she was facing a storm he had created. He should have protected her. Instead, he had hidden behind glass while the world tore her apart. The next day, the board demanded an urgent meeting. He attended remotely, his camera off. The chairman spoke with measured tones. Gabrielle, the company's reputation is at stake. Investors from Tokyo and Zurich are pausing negotiations. The only way forward is to issue a denial. A lie, Gabriel said. A statement the man corrected. You'll say she was never employed directly by you. That the rumors are false. He hesitated. And if she suffers, she's already irrelevant to the story, the chairman replied. This is about damage control. The words hit harder than any storm. Later that evening, the official statement went public, crafted, polished, cold. Mr. Hale categorically denies any inappropriate relationship with a member of the household staff. All reports suggesting otherwise are false and defamatory. It trended within hours. He turned off his phone, his tablet, everything. He couldn't bear to see the world rewriting something that had barely begun. Days passed. The housekeeper informed him that Isla had been terminated from the agency. They said her name became bad for business, she murmured. She tried calling once, but I wasn't sure if I should tell you. You should have, Gabriel said, voice flat. Where is she now? I think she's back in the city, working at a coffee shop downtown. He nodded but didn't move. He wanted to see her, to explain, to apologize. But fear chained him to the same seat. Fear of making it worse. Fear of seeing hatred in her eyes. Instead, he stayed in his mansion and watched the light fade. One evening, the news played on his muted television. A gossip show was discussing the scandal again. A guest laughed while showing her picture. Look at her. She's 20, probably thought she'd marry rich. Didn't last long, did it? The audience chuckled. Gabriel gripped the armrest until his knuckles turned white. He turned the TV off, but the sound of laughter stayed in his head. That night, he wrote her name on a blank piece of paper. Isla Moreno, just that. Then he folded it once and kept it in his pocket. The next morning, he drove into the city without telling anyone. The driver glanced back, surprised. Sir, this isn't your usual route. I know, Gabriel said. Just drive. The cafe was small, tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. Through the window, he saw her behind the counter, wearing a black apron, hair tied back. She looked thinner, her smile rehearsed. Customers came and went without noticing her sadness. He stayed in the car for a long time watching. He wanted to go in, but how could he? What would he say? I'm sorry I let the world destroy you for loving me. Too quietly, when she finally looked out the window, their eyes almost met, and he turned away. He told the driver to take him home. That evening, he opened the piano room again. The candles were gone, but the scent of wax still lingered. He sat there until night swallowed the house. The sound of the sea outside blended with the hum of traffic from the city two worlds colliding in his ears. He realized he was both one made of silence, one of noise, and neither could hold her. A storm of headlines and algorithms had stolen something too fragile for public eyes. The next morning, the company issued a new press release celebrating record profits. His name trended again, this time as a resilient leader. But Gabriel didn't feel resilient. He felt hollow. Every success felt like a betrayal. When the therapist visited, she noticed the candle on his desk. Still burning something from that night, she asked gently. "It's all I have left," he said. "Then keep it," she replied. "But know this fire doesn't heal by hiding." He looked out the window, where rain began again, light and familiar. Somewhere in that city, a girl was still walking home under the same sky. He whispered to no one, "I'm sorry." But the rain didn't answer. It never did. The world did what it always did. When fed a scandal, it moved on, leaving behind the wreckage of people's lives like driftwood after a storm. For the public, Gabriel Hale's story had already become another headline, buried under newer outrage. But for him, the noise never faded. Every time he opened his laptop, his name glared back from some tabloid archive. He stopped attending board meetings altogether, preferring silence to the polite cruelty of investors pretending not to judge him. Yet the quiet offered no peace. Each night he sat by the piano, listening to the rain and waiting for something that would never return. It was mid-April when he saw her again, not through the window or in a photograph, but in person, fragile and unguarded. He had forced himself out of the house that morning, determined to walk for the first time without the chair. His doctor had insisted he practice on uneven ground to rebuild strength, so he drove into the city before dawn, leaning on a cane, moving with slow precision. The streets were still wet from early rain, neon lights reflecting in puddles like broken stars. He stopped outside a small cafe familiar, the same one where he'd last seen her weeks ago. The sign above the door had faded letters, "The Haven." Inside, the smell of coffee and vanilla drifted through the air. A bell rang as he entered, and she turned toward the sound. For a moment, neither of them moved. Isla looked thinner, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but when she recognized him, her body stiffened. She didn't speak. He stepped closer, resting on the cane. "I didn't come to defend myself," he said quietly. "I came to see if you're okay." She forced a small laugh, brittle and tired. "Do I look okay?" "No," he admitted. "Neither do I." She crossed her arms, standing behind the counter like a barrier. "You shouldn't be here. If someone takes a picture, they've already taken everything they could." He interrupted. "What else is there to lose?" Her eyes flashed. "My peace. That's what I lose when people like you show up." The words cut, but he didn't look away. "You think I wanted this? You think I chose the story they wrote?" "You didn't deny it for me," she said, voice trembling now. "You denied it for yourself." He opened his mouth to argue, but closed it again. She was right. "I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid that if I tried to defend you, they'd destroy you more." She shook her head. "They already did." A customer entered, breaking the moment. She turned to take the order, her professional smile sliding back into place like armor. When the man left, Gabriel was still there, hands trembling on his cane. "I'm learning to stand," he said softly, as if the sentence itself was an apology. Isla looked at him, then really looked, and the anger in her expression wavered. Why, she asked, because sitting felt like hiding. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Finally, she exhaled. "You should go." He nodded but didn't move. "If you ever need anything, don't," she said quickly. "I don't need saving, neither do I." He answered, "But maybe we both need forgiveness." Her lips parted, but before she could respond, a voice called from the kitchen. She turned away. He walked to the door slowly, his steps uneven but steady. Outside, the morning light broke through the clouds for the first time in days. He looked back once through the window, saw her leaning against the counter. Eyes closed, and then he left. For the rest of the day, her face stayed with him. Back home, the housekeeper found him standing by the window, the cane at his side. "You're walking again," she said softly. "Barely," he replied, "but it's a start." Over the next week, the tabloids found a new obsession, and his scandal faded completely. But the damage had already been done. People at the company spoke to him differently now with distance. Invitations stopped coming. He was no longer the visionary billionaire. He was the man who had fallen for a maid. He accepted the isolation, almost welcomed it. It gave him clarity. He began redirecting funds from Hale Robotics into small community projects, grants for art students' therapy programs, for veterans' housing aid. He never announced it publicly. He just did it quietly because she had once said broken things made the best light. One evening, while finalizing donation papers, he stumbled upon a vlog trending on social media. The title froze him. Another rich man taking advantage. The Isla Moreno story. It had millions of views. The host spoke with righteous fury, showing her picture beside headlines, weaving a narrative of manipulation and abuse. She was 20, the host said. He was 37. Let that sink in. The audience clapped. Gabriel's chest tightened. He watched the rest of the video in silence until the credits rolled. The next morning, he drove back to the cafe. The windows were covered with newspaper. A sign read "Closed permanently." He called the number on the agency file, but it was disconnected. Panic surged, the kind that stripped logic away. He called the housekeeper. "Find her," he said. "Please." Days passed without word. Then on the third day, a letter arrived in an unmarked envelope. It was from Isla. The handwriting was small, careful, like she was trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. "Don't look for me," it said. "The more you try, the more they'll come for me. I just want to disappear for a while. Please let me." At the bottom, in faint ink, she had added, "You taught me that even silence can be kind." He read it until the words blurred. That night he went to the piano room again. He lit one of her old candles and let the wax drip across his fingers. Pain grounded him. He whispered her name once just to see if it still fit in his mouth. It did. Outside, the sea roared louder than ever, the waves smashing against the cliffs like applause for a tragedy no one else remembered. In the months that followed, Gabriel's company quietly replaced him as CEO. He didn't fight it. He moved into a smaller house near the harbor where the air smelled of salt and oil. He spent his days walking short distances and his nights writing letters he never sent. Sometimes when he ventured into town, people still recognized him. Some whispered, some stared. Most simply looked through him. But he didn't care. Every step he took without the chair was a rebellion against the life that had defined him. One rainy afternoon, as he sat near the pier, watching gulls circle over the water, he saw a woman handing out flyers for an art exhibit. He almost ignored her until she turned and smiled. It wasn't Isla, but for one blinding second he thought it was. He took the flyer, Art for Healing, hosted by the Haven Collective, the same name as her old cafe. He stared at the paper, until the ink began to blur from the rain. A strange calm settled over him. Maybe she hadn't vanished. Maybe she was simply building something new in a place he wasn't meant to follow. He folded the flyer and kept it in his pocket beside the old note she'd written. As he walked home, the city lights shimmered through the rain, each reflection breaking across puddles like pieces of a broken mirror, finally learning how to shine again. It had been nearly 7 months since the scandal, and the world had already replaced his story with 100 others. Yet for Gabriel Hale, time hadn't healed. It had only taught him how to live with the ache. He had learned to stand without pain, to walk without the wheelchair. But standing meant little when every step reminded him of what had been lost. The cane became a symbol, not of weakness, but of endurance. His company had gone on without him, the name Hale Robotics, now attached to new faces, new dreams, new scandals. But Gabriel had shifted his focus towards something quieter. He began funding a rehabilitation center for people with spinal injuries, a place that offered not just treatment, but dignity. The project consumed his days, though he knew it was really an act of penance. Every brick, every donation, every dollar spent was a conversation with the ghost of the girl he couldn't protect. When the press eventually discovered the foundation, they called it an image rebuilding campaign, but Gabriel ignored them. Let them think what they wanted. For once, he didn't owe anyone an explanation. The opening ceremony was scheduled for early spring. He hadn't planned to attend, he despised crowds, but something in him changed when he saw the guest list. Among the volunteers was a familiar name, Ila Moreno. He read it twice to be sure. The file said she had applied 3 months earlier, using her real name, no aliases. She was working as an art therapist in a community center for low-income families. The information struck him with equal parts relief and fear. She was alive close enough to touch, yet so far beyond reach. He spent the night pacing his study, torn between the urge to see her and the fear of reopening wounds that had barely begun to scar. When dawn came, he made his choice. He would go. The morning of the event was bright and cold. The foundation's new building stood on the outskirts of Seattle, overlooking the harbor. Reporters had gathered outside, cameras flashing questions flying like arrows. Gabriel walked past them without answering. Inside the space smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. On the stage stood a banner that read, Hale Rehabilitation Center, for strength, for hope, for life. The ceremony began with polite speeches from the board members, all rehearsed gratitude and public relations polish. Gabriel stayed near the back, invisible among the crowd. Then the coordinator announced the next segment, a presentation by the art therapy team, showcasing paintings created by disabled artists, supported by the foundation. The room dimmed slightly as a projector came to life, casting images on the screen. The first painting appeared a swirl of glass blues and muted golds, depicting a lone figure standing before a window streaked with rain. The caption below read, Still Standing, Artist Ila Moreno. The air left his lungs. The piece was unmistakably hers. The brush strokes chaotic, yet tender, the kind of art that bled emotion instead of pigment. The audience murmured in admiration, unaware that the man in the back of the room was staring at his own reflection, captured in paint. And then she stepped onto the stage. Ila wore a simple cream dress, her hair tied loosely, strands escaping to frame her face. The sight of her hit him like lightning through glass. She looked stronger, steadier, as though the world's cruelty had taught her not bitterness, but resilience. She began speaking, her voice calm, carrying easily through the room. "Art saved me when words couldn't," she said. "And sometimes when life tries to silence you, color becomes the only language left." People applauded softly. Gabrielle's vision blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the weight of recognition. She had built something out of ruin, and it was beautiful. When the presentation ended, she stepped down from the stage, surrounded by people, congratulating her. Gabriel waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. She saw him before he spoke. Her expression froze, unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "Then why does it feel like I should?" he replied. "Because this place exists because of you." "Because of what you taught me," he corrected. "You said broken things make the best light. I tried to build a place that could prove you right." She looked around at the hall, the volunteers, the laughter of people in wheelchairs, the nurses guiding them with patience. "You did all this?" "We did," he said, "even if you didn't know it." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she sighed, the sound half defeat, half wonder. "I thought I'd never see you again." "You almost didn't," he said. "But I couldn't live another day pretending. What happened didn't matter." Her eyes softened, but there was still caution there. "And what do you expect from this redemption forgiveness?" "Neither," he said, "only truth." She crossed her arms. "The truth won't change the past." "No," he admitted, "but maybe it can change how we carry it." She looked at him for a long time, her gaze searching. "You've changed," she said finally. "You stand differently." He smiled faintly. "So do you." A volunteer interrupted, then asking for her help with a painting display. She nodded and turned to leave, but before she did, he said, "Isla, wait." She stopped, shoulders tense. "Yes, if you ever doubt what you're worth," he said, "come back here and see what you created." Her eyes glistened. "You don't get to say things like that anymore." "Then let me show you," he said softly. Not with words. He gestured toward the stage, and before she could protest, he stepped onto it. The audience turned as the lights brightened. The coordinator whispered nervously, "Mr. Hale, the press," but Gabriel ignored him. He took the microphone, his voice calm, yet trembling. "I wasn't supposed to speak today," he began. "But I can't let this foundation open under a lie." The room fell silent. "Months ago, I failed someone who didn't deserve it. I let fear dictate truth. I watched the world destroy her and did nothing. But everything you see here, every wall, every painting, every light exists, because she reminded me what it means to be alive." Whispers rippled through the audience. Reporters raised their cameras. He continued anyway. "Her name is Isla Moreno, and if you believe she's just a scandal, you haven't seen what she's built with her pain." The crowd stirred. Isla stood frozen at the edge of the room, her face pale but eyes blazing with shock. "Because of her," Gabriel said, "I can stand again. Judge me if you must." The room erupted in murmurs, flashes, bursting from cameras, but Gabriel didn't look away from her. Their eyes locked across the chaos. For a heartbeat, it felt like the rest of the world vanished, leaving only them, the man who fell, and the woman who refused to. Then, without another word, he stepped down from the stage and walked out through the doors into the blinding sunlight. Behind him, voices rose, questions shouted, but he didn't turn back. Each step felt lighter, each breath freer. For the first time in years, he wasn't walking away from guilt. He was walking toward courage. And as he reached the courtyard, he saw her through the glass doors. standing still amid the crowd, tears glinting on her cheeks, like tiny reflections of the light he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. The confessions spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, every major news outlet in Seattle had replayed the clip of Gabriel Hale standing on that stage, his voice steady, but eyes full of something rawer than remorse. Some called it bravery. Others called it foolishness. It didn't matter. For once, the story was his to tell. The Foundation's board panicked journalists camped outside his house, and a dozen PR agencies offered to clean the mess he had created, but Gabriel refused to speak again. The truth had already been said. Nothing else needed polish, yet the world demanded more, as it always did. They wanted closure, spectacle, and ending fit for public consumption. So when a national morning show invited him for an exclusive interview, he surprised everyone by accepting. "You sure about this?" his manager asked. "They'll dig everything up again." "Then let them," Gabriel said. "Maybe this time they'll listen." The studio lights were unforgiving, the kind that revealed every line on his face. The host smiled with that mixture of empathy and curiosity reserved for broken celebrities. "Mr. Hale," she began yesterday, "you made a confession that stunned the country. You spoke about a young woman, Isla Moreno, the same person linked to you months ago in what many called a scandal. Why choose to speak now?" He looked straight into the camera. "Because silence is cowardice dressed as protection. I thought denying her would keep her safe, but all it did was tell the world she was disposable. She isn't." The audience behind the glass window went silent. The host leaned forward. "Do you love her?" Gabriel's fingers tightened around the armrest. "I do," he said simply. "But love doesn't always survive the world's noise. Do you regret what happened between you?" "I regret my fear," he said, "not her." For a moment the host said nothing. She seemed almost moved. "There's been talk that she might attend today's broadcast. Do you know anything about that?" No, Gabriel answered, though a small part of him dared to hope. The segment continued with predictable questions about redemption and morality, but his attention drifted to the studio door, half expecting it to open. And then it did. The audience gasped as a young woman entered quietly, escorted by a producer. Isla stood just inside the lights, nervous but composed, wearing a simple navy dress. The host blinked, surprised but quick to recover. "Well," she said, "it appears we have company." Gabriel rose instinctively, ignoring the cameras. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Isla looked at him, her expression unreadable. The host gestured. "Would you like to join us, Miss Moreno?" Isla hesitated, then nodded. She crossed the stage, her steps measured but sure. When she sat beside him, the studio went utterly silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. "I wasn't supposed to come," she said, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier. "But I saw what you said yesterday, and I needed to see if it was real." Gabriel met her gaze. Every word. "You hurt me," she said quietly. Not accusing, just honest. "I know, you let them destroy me. I know that too." "Then why now?" He exhaled, eyes glassy. "Because I finally learned that truth without courage is just another lie." Isla looked down at her hands, then at the host, who seemed to realize this conversation was no longer hers to control. "They said I wanted money," Isla said softly. "They said I wanted fame. But all I ever wanted was for the truth to stop feeling like a wound." She turned to Gabriel. "You made me feel seen once. Then the world made me wish I hadn't been. And now," he asked, "now I'm still standing. she said, echoing the title of her painting. The audience behind the glass began to applaud quietly, the sound building until it filled the room. Gabriel reached for her hand, not dramatically, not for the cameras, but the way a man reaches for home after wandering too long in the dark. She didn't pull away. The host, visibly emotional, cleared her throat. "I think we've all learned something today," she said, trying to wrap the moment into television's neat structure. "But before we close, Mr. Hale, if you could say one thing to the public, what would it be?" He looked back at the camera, his hand still in Isla's. That power means nothing if it isn't kind. That redemption isn't found in silence, and that sometimes love doesn't ask for permission, it just survives. The show ended there, but the moment didn't. By evening, the clip had gone viral. Millions watched it, debated, it cried over it, mocked it. Yet the tone was different this time. The cruelty had softened into reflection. People began posting comments like, "Maybe we were too quick to judge." And sometimes the story we're told isn't the one that's true. For the first time, the internet seemed to remember it had a conscience. Isla turned off her phone after reading only a handful of messages. She needed quiet. Gabriel met her outside the studio, away from the lights. "You didn't have to defend me," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "I defended us." She smiled faintly, weary but genuine. "And what happens now, whatever you want?" "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said. "Then don't," he whispered. "Just walk with me." They left together, through a side exit, the city alive with noise and color. For the first time, no one shouted their names. The world was too busy healing from its own cruelty. They walked along the edge of the harbor, where the evening sky reflected off the water in bruised shades of blue and gold. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was waiting alive with possibility. "You once said broken things make the best light," he said. "You proved it." She looked at him, her expression softening. "So did you." A ferry horn echoed across the bay, low and mournful. She leaned against the railing, the wind tugging at her hair. "We can't go back," she said. "No," he agreed. "But maybe we can go forward differently." She turned her eyes glistening in the last light of day. "I don't want promises," she said. "Only honesty." "Then here's honesty," he said. "I loved you before. I knew what it meant. I love you now, knowing what it costs." For a moment she didn't move. Then she stepped closer until their foreheads almost touched. The air smelled of salt and rain. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "Maybe it's forgiveness," he said. "Maybe it's just us still standing." The city lights shimmered across the water, reflections of glass and gold, merging like their shadows. Somewhere behind them, the world kept spinning headlines, changing people, forgetting. But in that quiet corner by the harbor, two people who had been broken by the same storm stood side by side, unashamed. The cameras were gone, the microphones silent. What remained was the kind of truth that needed no witness. A year later, Seattle's rain returned the way it always did. Quiet at first, like an old friend tapping gently on the window to remind the city of its heartbeat. The gallery stood on the corner of Elliott Bay, a structure of glass and pale stone that caught the light differently depending on the hour. Its sign read "Beyond Glass," a foundation for art and healing. Side laughter mingled with the faint strains of piano music, the sound soft enough to blend with rain. Gabriel Hale stood near the entrance, leaning lightly on his cane, his reflection framed against the window. His hair had begun to gray at the temples, but his eyes held a calm steadiness that no longer hid from the world. He watched guests move through the space, pausing before canvases painted by artists who had once believed their hands were useless. A boy with a prosthetic arm adjusted his brush and smiled as people admired his work. Across the room, Isla was speaking to a reporter, her dress simple but luminous in the warm light. She gestured toward a wall filled with paintings of storms, sunlight, and glass. Each piece here, she said, was made by someone who thought they had nothing left to give. But pain is still creation, it's just art that hasn't found its frame yet. The reporter nodded, visibly moved. "And what about your own piece?" Isla smiled. "It's not mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who has ever tried to stand again." When she turned, she caught Gabriel's gaze. For a second, the noise of the room faded, replaced by something quieter and deeper understanding. She excused herself and crossed the gallery floor toward him. "You're supposed to be resting," she teased gently. "I've rested enough for a lifetime," he said, smiling. "Besides, I like watching you talk about art as if it's oxygen." "It is," she said. They stood by the tall glass window, where rain streaked down in silver lines. Outside, the harbor lights shimmered through the drizzle. "Do you remember," he asked softly, "that first day you cleaned this glass and said it looked lonely?" "I remember," she replied. "I also remember you didn't believe me when I said it needed something that breathes." He turned to her. "And now it has people," she said, looking around. "Now it breathes." Guests began to gather near the stage for the evening's final speech. The coordinator waved them forward, but Gabriel shook his head. "You go," he told Isla. "It's your night." "It's ours," she corrected and took his hand. Together they walked onto the stage. The audience quieted, expecting formality, but what they got was sincerity. 1 year ago, Isla began. We both stood behind glass, afraid, misunderstood, and silent. Tonight we stand beyond it. She glanced at him, and he nodded. Gabriel took the microphone next. "This place was never meant to be a monument," he said. "It's a reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to us give us the tools to heal others. And when you share your pain, it loses its power to define you." He paused, eyes searching the crowd, until they found the boy with the prosthetic arm. Courage isn't standing without falling. It's standing even when the world expects you not to. The audience applauded, but the moment felt intimate, like a conversation between souls rather than a public speech. When the applause faded, Isla stepped forward and added, "They called it scandal once. We call it a beginning." A hush fell, followed by gentle clapping that swelled into thunderous applause. Flashbulbs lit the room, yet it no longer felt invasive. It felt like celebration. Later, after the guests began to leave and the lights dimmed, Gabrielle and Isla lingered by the window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper. The city beyond looked softer, forgiven. "It's strange," he said quietly. "For years I thought the glass was what kept me safe. Now I realize it just kept the world out." Isla touched his arm gently. "Maybe the glass wasn't the prison she said. Maybe it was just waiting for you to see through it." He turned to face her fully. "You gave me that," he said. "No," she whispered. "We gave it to each other." For a while they stood in silence, watching the lights ripple across the bay. The reflection of the gallery shimmered against the window, 2 figures surrounded by color and motion, framed in gold and blue. The piano music drifted back, soft, hesitant notes from the boy still practicing in the corner. Gabriel smiled. "He plays like you used to." "Unpolished but full of heart," she said. "The best kind of music, the only kind," he murmured. She looked at him, then really looked, and something unspoken passed between them, a quiet promise that didn't need words or witnesses. He reached for her hand. This time there was no hesitation, no fear, no scandal. Waiting outside the glass, only warmth, only life. The rain outside caught the last of the streetlights, turning each drop into a spark before it disappeared into the sea. "Do you ever wonder," she asks softly, "if the world will forget?" "Let it," he said. "We remember." "That's enough." She smiled, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. "You know," she said, "I used to think love needed permission, and now I think love just needs courage." He kissed the top of her head, the gesture gentle and final in its simplicity. "And maybe a little rain," he added. They stood there as the last guests departed the gallery, empty except for them. The reflection of the candle light shimmered faintly against the glass, mirroring their silhouettes. Outside, the sea breathed against the shore, endless and forgiving. Inside, the two of them stood framed by light proof that even from ruin, beauty could rise again. If this story touched something deep inside you tonight, don't let it end here. Take a moment, breathe, look around, and remember, there are still people like Gabriel and Isla everywhere in this world, walking quietly through storms you might never see. Some of them are learning to stand again, some are trying to forgive themselves, and some are just waiting for someone to look at them the way love once did. If you felt that heartbeat through the screen, if a scene or a word stayed with you longer than you expected, that means the story found you for a reason. Maybe you've been behind your own glass for too long, thinking life has already passed you by. Maybe you've been too afraid to reach out, to speak, to feel again. Tonight, let this be your reminder that it's never too late to start over. Healing doesn't ask permission, and neither does love. On this channel, we tell stories for people who still believe that compassion can change everything, for those who've lost, who've been judged, who've been told that they're too broken to be loved again. We tell them because the world forgets too easily, and because kindness still deserves a place to breathe. So if you felt something here, if you believe the world could use more stories like this, please take a second to subscribe, to comment below where you're watching from, and tell us what part of this story stayed with you most. Your words aren't just feedback, they're the echo that keeps stories like this alive. The more voices join, the more hearts we can reach together. Maybe you're in Houston or Seattle or a small town somewhere no one knows, watching this alone. But you're not alone anymore. We're building a place for stories that see you. Leave a comment, tell us your story, or simply write, "I'm still standing." It's our way of reminding each other that resilience is contagious. And if you know someone who needs hope, a friend, a parent, someone silently carrying too much, share this video with them. You never know what a small act of kindness can ignite. We'll be here every night with new stories that breathe light into ordinary days and show that love, even after everything, still finds its way back. Because the truth is, behind every window there's someone waiting to be seen. Behind every scandal, there's a soul that just wanted to be understood. Behind every broken thing, there's a light that's learning to shine again. You've just spent time in a world built from glass and rain, from forgiveness and courage. Don't leave it behind when the screen fades. Carry it with you. Let it remind you to see others differently, to speak gently, to choose empathy when the world chooses noise. And if tonight meant something, if you found a piece of yourself in this story, like Gabriel standing again or Isla choosing to believe, then take one simple action Right now, subscribe, like, share, and let the world know that you still believe in love that heals. This is Emma's Stories, where we don't tell perfect fairy tales, we tell the truth dressed in hope. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for being part of something real. Till the next story, stay kind, stay human, and never stop standing beyond the glass.